When you think about cultural expressions, it is pretty unlikely the first thing that comes across your mind is, well, food. But there is so much cultural heritage within the delicacies from one nation, you can pretty much build a society's profile with every bite. Every dish and every recipe from each country is infused with its own traditions, history, weather conditions and lifestyle. A country's gastronomy can pretty much be the gateway into a nation's culture. Nevertheless, societies are rarely isolated, and one dish can be loaded with a cultural blend from many different inputs. So chances are that some dishes actually come from places you'll never expect. Even though we have our top-of-mind reference, when it comes to associating food with a specific country, like sushi with Japan, or pasta with Italy. Sometimes there is much more to it, and even those assumptions can be wrong in some cases. Welcome to Small World, and today we will show the top 5 times when we got wrong food and its origins. 5. When you think of France, the first thing that usually comes into your mind is the beautiful scenery of Paris. Wouldn't it sound right to have a nice breakfast by the stunning view of the Eiffel Tower? Picture a nice cup of coffee, some eggs and, of course, one of the most iconic pastries worldwide, the croissant. This may as well sound like a typical French breakfast, right? Well, don't get me wrong, it certainly sounds good, but it would be a mistake to refer to it as the typical French breakfast, because, believe it or not, croissants are not actually from France. At least they are not, if we ground on historical basis. Whether or not it may be painful to hear the truth, the link between France and the croissant does exist, since French people did improve the recipe, and they were responsible for making it a signature pastry, but we cannot attribute the origins of the croissant to the French. Let me elaborate. Which country is responsible for this pastry? Well, you'll be surprised, but there are historical records that point to the fact that the recipe originated in Austria. Although Austria's recipe was a little different to the one we know today. This treat was originally made with lots of butter and it was originally known as Kipfel. It was in fact a crescent-shaped morning treat to have with your daily breakfast. By the 1920s, the French were the ones who perfected the recipe of the croissant and gave it a high-class status to begin with. So, if you were having a croissant in the early 20s with your breakfast, chances are that you were la crème de la crème in French society. After a few years, the dish became more affordable and migrated to the middle classes, hence more people were able to try it. And, if this revelation isn't enough to impress, there are also rumors that state that croissants were created in Vienna in 1683, in celebration of the defeat of the Ottomans by the Christian forces at the famous Siege of Vienna. The point of the dish was to resemble the flag of the Ottomans, which contained a crescent shape. 4. Since we are already talking about France and breakfast, why don't we add another French dish that is not French at all? You heard me right. The world-famous French toast has French on its name, but we can say that's about it. The fried soaked bread that complements every perfect breakfast is as French as pizza. The origins of the French toast are probably more ancient than you could imagine. Like many of its contributions, the Roman Empire was one of the most giving civilizations to the modern world, and the French toast was one of their innovations. The first record of the recipe dates back to the 5th century AD. The Romans would soak bread in a milk and eggs mixture, and then fry it in oil. That is pretty close to today's French toast as we know it. On the other hand, there are some people who actually believe that the Englishman, Joseph French, was the original creator for this treat in 1724, and he just forgot to put the apostrophe after naming the recipe as his. However, there is certainly enough evidence to believe the French toast is a Roman achievement, but you can always tell the story that, in your opinion, is best. By now, you are probably wondering how the French people refer to the French toast. Actually, there is some interesting stuff on that matter. In France, the dish is named pain perdu, which in English means lost bread. The reason for that goes back to when the dish was first introduced in the country. In order to seize old bread and avoid waste, they used stale bread in the recipe, which was really convenient for the old bread since you need to soak it for the preparation, and that way people wouldn't know the bread was stout. In other parts of Europe, the dish is prepared in different ways, to the extent that it may seem like every country has their own particular style. For example, the Scottish serve it with sausage and in between 2 slices of French toast, making it a sandwich. In other parts of the UK, they eat it with ketchup or else the dish is not complete. 3. Now it is time to move to new gastronomical landscapes. Now we land in the scenery of tacos, fajitas, burritos and chimichangas. One might think those represent the pinnacle of authentic Mexican food, right? Well, one of these foods cannot formally be considered Mexican. Can you guess which one? Let's discard the obvious ones first. As you expect, tacos and burritos are 100% Mexican. So, maybe the fajitas? Not quite. The black sheep of the family are actually the chimichangas. Maybe if you were born in Arizona you already knew this, because Tucson prides itself to be the home of the chimichangas. This title is used as a motto by the city's tourism office. Now, the chimichangas have a funny origin story. Let's start with the fact that they do come from the original Mexican dish, the burrito. There are actually two different restaurants in Arizona that claim the invention of this dish. On one hand, we have the current title holder as creator of the chimichanga, El Charro Cafe, located in Tucson, Arizona. The owner, Monica Flynn, a brilliant, unexpected and unique chef, accidentally dropped a burrito on the frying pan while her kids were playing in the kitchen. Thus, the chimichanga was created. The dish was born merely as a happy accident. But there is more to the story. When Monica dropped the burrito on the frying pan, she was ready to drop a curse word in frustration, but her kids were present, so instead of a bad word she used the made-up phonetic, chimichanga. When she took the burrito out of the frying pan she realized the result was actually really good, and the word soon spread among the locals, and the beloved chimichanga was born in the year of 1922. The other restaurant that claims to be the rightful creator dates back to 1946, in a Mexican restaurant called Macayo's. Woody Johnson insists he is the one who created this recipe. Johnson says that, just as a habit, he usually deep-fried unsold burritos to sell them on the next day, and called them toasted monkeys. Then he concluded that the more accurate way of translating was chimichanga, since the phonetic is equivalent to some Mexican expressions that align with the toasted monkeys concept. However, the more broadly accepted version, at least as general consensus, is the accidental one. And the fact that the story takes place almost 30 years before the toasted monkeys one, just adds to its credibility. 2. We are almost at the top, and here, in second place, we have one that you might never have thought of as from a different country. Most people loves it, and you can have it anywhere around the world. This one doesn't require any translation, sushi. Sushi is not originally from Japan as you may expect, but we will get to that in a bit. First we have to get some context. The meaning of the word sushi is also not what most people think it means. The word sushi doesn't directly translate to raw fish. No sir. Instead it actually refers to vinegared rice that is served with toppings that might, but not necessarily, include raw fish. Sushi, or at least the early versions of it, wasn't served as we know it. The original purpose of having the rice and raw fish together was to preserve the raw fish for long periods. Rice was thrown away and only the fish was meant to be consumed. This process was known as narazushi. This process has been done for centuries. It dates back in between the 3rd and 5th century. And just as we mentioned before, the narazushi process did not originate in Japan. It actually took place in Southeast Asia, and more specifically China. Not a shocking surprise, since the Chinese were pioneers in a bunch of different innovations, like gunpowder and paper. Now, the reason we think sushi comes from Japan is due to the fact that, around the 16th century in Kyoto, they adopted the recipe as their own, and introduced new toppings to tone with the fish and rice base. In Japan were also introduced some of the signature complements we know today, such as wasabi, since it comes from the root of the Wasabia japonica, a plant that only grows in Japanese terrain. Sorry to break it to you, but since this root only grows in Japan, it is extremely expensive to get, and the wasabi that most of the restaurants use is a mix between horseradish and mustard powder, which later is colored green to resemble the original ingredient. Now, it is also important to recall that the Japanese serve sushi in a very different way from the Western version. Most of the ingredients they use are far from the ones you find on your typical California roll style. Japanese sushi is famous for its simplicity, usually comprising nothing but rice, fish, and nori, along with some seasoning. Western sushi is more complicated, adding high-fat ingredients, such as tempura, mayonnaise, avocado, and cream cheese, few of which make an appearance in traditional Japanese sushi. The biggest distinction is that Western sushi tends to lean towards bold colors and strong flavors, rather than the subtler shades and flavor notes of its Japanese counterpart, where the simple tastes of the fish and the rice are at the forefront, enhanced by delicate seasonings like akasu and dashi. 1. This one, out of the ones we mentioned towards now, is one that may surprise the most. What comes into your mind when we mention Italy? The Roman Colosseum? Maybe the Venice canals, having a good slice of pizza in front of the Leaning Tower? Or perhaps a fancy Milanese restaurant with red wine and, of course, pasta. This delicious food, known for its hundreds of presentations, didn't originate in the region of Sicily like many may think. The Roman Empire perfected most of the different shapes and presentations we know today, but they are not the original inventors of this dish. Kind of disappointing for the Italians, considering the fact that Italy occupies the first place in pasta consumption worldwide. Not really a surprise, but interestingly enough, the second and third places in pasta consumption are occupied by Venezuela and Tunisia respectively. Now, once again, China takes the trophy. Early versions of this dish appeared in the region and those records date back to 5000 BC. The Chinese prepared pasta with hard wheat flour or rice flour. Marco Polo, in one of his numerous expeditions, brought the recipe of pasta from the east to Sicily. Keep in mind that neither Italians nor Chinese people are responsible for all pasta variations. According to the International Pasta Organization, there are at least 600 types of pasta, meaning that there are at least 600 different recipes from many different European and Asian nations. One particular pasta recipe stands for its curious origin story. This one is probably one of the most common and beloved spaghetti preparations, the classic meatballs and bolognese spaghetti. This one is neither Chinese nor Italian. We can attribute this recipe to the Italian immigrants from the early 20th century in the great city of New York. The earliest version of this recipe dates back to the 1920s. Funny enough, we can consider this dish, in fact, American.
Corretto.
So, my friends and foodies watching this top 5, we've arrived towards the end of our video. Hopefully your mind was blown, or at least we are pleased with the fact that you have expanded your culinary small talk a tiny bit. Please tell us in the comments if you know other foods that are mistakenly known from a different country. I've been Thomas and this has been Small World. I'll see you on the next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and share this video with all your friends.